Thank you, Dr. Middleton, for your testimony. I'm now recognizing members on the dais for their questions. I'll go to the member from Wisconsin, Mr. Tom Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Boltail, welcome to the committee here. I represent a number of the northern tribes in the 7th Congressional District in Wisconsin. Have you researched the situation in Lac du Flambeau in regards to a young woman, Melissa Beeson?
Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with that particular case, but I imagine that it's familiar to many of the cases that we've heard from family members.
Yeah, and I think you're correct about that. This just happened in 2025 where she went missing. They still have not found her. And reading an article here from Wisconsin Public Radio, it says the Lac du Flambeau Reservation has had 3 other missing persons in the last 4 years that I did not realize had happened. And I know there was a very prominent case back in the early 1990s of a woman who was, I believe her remains still have not been found. And so we certainly see it, what is right in our backyard in northern Wisconsin. Ms. Echohawk, why do you think this is happening?
We have an ongoing legacy of both the over-sexualization of Native women specifically, where we were, some of the initial, if we go all the way back to Christopher Columbus, his original journey, or his journals actually talk about the trafficking and rape of Indigenous women. We have the stories of Pocahontas, a Pamunkey tribal member who died overseas as a trafficked and then, and from what my perspective, a murdered Indigenous woman. And so we have an ongoing legacy of working towards and understanding that Indigenous women, we should not be subjected to not only this over-sexualization, but also what does it look like to ensure that predators do not come after us. I have worked with communities across the country, and like I talked about with my rapist, who moved across reservations, move across village areas because they know that they can operate with impunity. I was working with one community, and he did what we call it res hopping. He jumped from one reservation to the other. They were unable to prosecute him as a direct result of the jurisdictional issues. By the time he hit the 5th reservation, he killed her. And so the cross-jurisdictional issues address are directly impacting whether or not these perpetrators who have identified this opportunity to operate with impunity because they're moving around and they can't be prosecuted, and it ends up with the murder, and it ends up with those who disappeared who are never found. And so crossing and ensuring that those jurisdictional issues are closed is essential. And I know that the Coalition of Large Tribes has put together legislative language specifically on how to address that.
Do you think this is tied at all to cartel activity? I know over the previous few years we heard that some of the tribes, including one in particular, I heard in Montana, that there was a tremendous amount of cartel activity going on. Is that sometimes tied to this?
Absolutely. In Washington State, we had a young person who had gone missing, and we do have what was the very first alert system, the Red Alert System. I was blessed to co-author in Washington State. We issued that alert. We were actually able to find this young person who by that time was in a vehicle in California and was being trafficked by the cartels and being part, from our understanding, in moving drugs across the border. And so we do know that there is an impact of the cartels, and we do know that they also target reservations, again, as a direct result of the cross-jurisdictional issues that have to be addressed through a legislative fix.
Same question, Dr. Middleman. Is cartel activity tied to this?
I'm probably not the most kind of educated on whether cartel activity specifically would contribute to this, but I would say, when you have a population that lacks the infrastructure and a community that lacks the infrastructure to systematically resolve these cases, you leave yourself open to predatory actions. And if there's anyone that's ever been a good predator, it's cartels.
Yeah. I'll just close with this, Mr. Chairman. So first of all, thanks to all of you who have come before us today that you would share your stories. And I think this is a piece of a broader picture here in our country where just recently, over the last couple of years, we had 350,000 minors that have come into our country that they have no idea where they're at, that came from other countries. And we need to make sure that we identify everyone possible, including the indigenous women who have been trafficked or have been harmed in some way. So once again, thank you so much for coming, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson, Dr. Simpson, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank all of you for being here, for your testimony and stuff. I almost feel like I need to apologize that you need to be here. This ought to be something that we're working on, that we're all united on and trying to solve this problem. And I almost feel like I'm kind of embarrassed that you feel like you have to come and tell us what the problem is. We should know this. But thank you all for being here. Abigail, you're always compelling to listen to. I enjoy it very much. While I don't enjoy the subject very much. But the one question I did want to ask Mr. Semans, I think you were teasing me at the end of your statement when you said, I have an answer to the jurisdictional problem.
And actually we do. It's submitted in our written testimony.
You can turn on your mic, please. Thank you.
It's actually submitted in our written testimony, a link and an actual fix to the jurisdictional issue. Like I told you before, in Indian country, even 280 states, but in our reservation, if you have a highway going down the road and one side is trust land and one side is deeded land, the person going on this side, if he's a non-Indian and the tribal police stop him, they can't cite him or arrest him for anything. Vice versa, on the other side, if it's a native coming down the highway on the trust land, they can, but the state can't. I mean, and it's just so complex that even knowing what the plot of the land is on the road, on which side, whether or not you have jurisdiction. And it really creates a major problem, especially in these investigations. And I can tell you that the tribal law enforcement are probably some of the most professional and dedicated law enforcement people there are. And I think given the proper authority under this jurisdiction, I think it would be one step towards helping in this type of situation.
If I can add quickly to that, sure. I worked with a family who came to me. They had a loved one who was murdered, and it hadn't been investigated, and this was in a large city. And so we reach out, we find out that this woman had been beaten, murdered, and left under a bus stop. However, the bus stop itself was the jurisdiction of the county, where the sidewalk in which she was found was the jurisdiction of the city, and there was nobody took the case up. And so as a direct result of the victim services resources we have at my organization, we were able to advocate, and but then 5 months later, we were able to get an investigator assigned. They still have not solved that murder, but these jurisdictional issues have to have the support of victim services, and to ensure that there are advocates that when these things happen, that people have the support, mental health support, physical support, and also just us standing with them. If we had not pushed, there would not have been an investigator assigned, and still to this day, we're continuing to push because that family deserves justice.
Well, thank you for that. As I was trying to say in my testimony originally, this is unusual and confusing, and I don't understand why it's that way, and we've got to change that somehow. It is something we need to work on together. So I plan on doing that, but it's beyond the committee that I sit on, the Appropriations Committee that I chair, the Interior Committee. It's probably gets into the Judiciary Committee and into this committee and stuff, but it is something that we need to address. And as I told you beforehand, I think it comes from 20, 40, 50 years ago when we didn't trust tribal police and stuff, and they weren't as sophisticated as they are today. And I will tell you, all the tribal police officers that I've met today, they go through the same training as our state police officers do, or our local police officers, and they're every bit as competent and do just as good a job. And that's why Mr. Newhouse's legislation to make sure that they have the benefits, that they can stay in their communities and stuff instead of being hired by the local, the nearest city or county police officers once they get trained. And the same thing is true with firefighters and other people. So that's something we need to work on. But I look forward to working with you to try to solve some of these problems, and it's a subject that we've got to address. So I appreciate you all being here today, and thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson, who yields his time. At this time, the chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes. Dr. Middleman, near the end of your testimony, you said something that caught my eye. You said the principal challenge is no longer scientific capability. The principal challenge is deployment. What is preventing this technology from being deployed more broadly? Is it awareness? Is it cost, procurement, training, legal issues? What is it?
I appreciate the question. I think there's a number of things. If I was just to rank them, not in a particular order, but by recency in which I've heard the feedback, I think perhaps the biggest issue is that I'm not clear that tribes truly understand the resources that are now available. As it was mentioned, this program began in 2025, and most of the tribal agencies are not aware that we have tools such as the DNA technology we offer to work these cases. That's one big issue. The other issue is beyond the jurisdictional items that Congressman Simpson had mentioned. Even when you get into starting working some of these cases, they'll find someone that has died. They're not necessarily easily identifiable or describable, and an anthropologist has to come in and say, I think this person may be from this community or not from this community. All that's uncertain as well. So there's so many rules and kind of debates and discussions that really block the ability to then surface the case further. People don't know the technology is available. And the last thing I'll say is that, I've offered myself, I will come anywhere to any community myself, and I will go sit down. We have AI tools that can go through cases, identify them. I just want to say that there's a huge problem in surfacing cases, but right now, everyone here already knows of hundreds to thousands of cases that are surfaced. They're ready to go, and they're sitting on a desk, and we could work through those right now, and you guys could measure us on our ability to just resolve the case.
Thank you, Dr. Middleman. Mr. Semans, very thoughtful testimony. One of my takeaways that I got from it was you repeatedly emphasize systems, and you make a point that technology alone is not enough. Looking across the cases that you've seen, where do the investigations most commonly fail? Is it in the first 48 hours? Is it jurisdiction? Is it prosecutorial discretion? Is it communications? What is it?
On the cold cases, the first thing that happens, you're right, the first 48 hours. And what we saw and what we concentrated on when we did our training was the initial responders. What exactly they should be doing, the evidence, the witnesses that they should be gathering, and the keeping of that evidence for future forensic studies. But one of the other things, everybody gets that in the academy, whether it's BIA Academy, State Academy. But one of the things that we've seen over and over is the initial response does not do a complete, thorough investigation at the beginning of
what is it in those first 48 hours? Is it primarily evidence collection, or is there other things that are happening in that first 48 hours that are critical?
Well, the reason it's really important is within that 48 hours is you're able to identify the individuals and the evidence before they all disappear. After that, things, whether it's going to be the weather, whether it's going to be people, leaving, whether it's people there with, a cell phone that took something, it all starts disappearing. And so it's very important to concentrate within that first 48 hours, or actually within the first 5 hours, of ensuring that everything is covered, including identifying witnesses and identifying individuals that just may have been taking a cell picture.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Semans. Appreciate that. Ms. Echohawk, question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how innovative technologies, AI, how could they be used to enhance existing databases to provide a better picture of the MMIP crisis?
Right now, across the nation, there is no specific way that they are gathering American Indian Alaska Native data. If we just look at the Department of Justice, the NAMIS does not talk to the other databases within the Department of Justice. And so what we need is to use innovative technology to go into that, to gather up all of the information, find the commonalities, and look for the opportunities to understand where, for example, a serial killer might be operating or where individuals might be being trafficked more. And right now, that needs to be done in collaboration with the tribal nations to ensure that whatever data is used, whatever technology is used, is done with meaningful tribal consultation to ensure that it respects Indigenous data sovereignty. But it is possible. We acknowledge that it is possible. It just takes the will to get it done.
Thank you, Ms. Ekohawk. I appreciate that. And my time hasn't expired. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from the state of Arizona, Ms. Grijalva, for 5 minutes. Ms. Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. And Dr. Bulltail, thank you for sharing your family story. Your testimony is a powerful reminder that behind every case is a family seeking justice. And throughout today's hearing, we've heard about the federal government's commitment to addressing MMIP crisis, but your testimony reflects the reality that many families are facing, a reality which is far too often families are left to conduct their own investigations and are left to push for action by the justice system. Could you elaborate further on the lack of resources available for families, what resources are urgently needed, and why sustained federal support is critical, particularly in cases where the agencies decline or fail to investigate or prosecute?
Thank you for the question. So as I had mentioned, family members are really pushing for a lot of the changes, measurable action, but we're not invited to sit at the table. I haven't heard much mention of how family members are involved in a lot of the proposed procedures that we have heard. I feel like this process is very chaotic and experimental, where there are constants that are systematic failures and lack of action from law enforcement, and the outcome is going to be the same because of that. So we do need consistent contact from law enforcement. We need to know that our cases are a priority, that the resources aren't going to be dedicated elsewhere.
Thank you. Ms. Ekohawk, your testimony referenced a survey the Institute conducted in which 63.8% of responding organizations reported being substantially impacted by federal funding cuts, including delayed grant disbursements and the elimination of longstanding funding opportunities. And last year, we saw the Department of Justice canceling hundreds of grants supporting safety and justice. Could you speak to how funding disruptions affect those on the ground working on addressing the MMIP crisis and the real-world consequences for victims, survivors, families, tribal communities when funding is decreased or delayed?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Our report that was released this morning, Sacred Responsibility, Protecting Our People, details the 201 organizations that we did that survey with. And for folks, it's created incredible uncertainty. And in fact, for those who had grants eliminated and then they were reinstated, they didn't even rehire because they're so afraid their grants are going to go away anyways. And so they're really working towards what does it look like to have sustained funding that is respectful of the fact that we have a treaty right to these resources in order to serve our victims of violence. One of the things that report also found is that 43% of the folks who we surveyed were having a very difficult time retaining law enforcement officers. Those officers are so good, as what was told. They're phenomenal. And because we don't have the appropriate resources that could be addressed in the Tribal Law Enforcement Parity Act, in addition to the Badges Act, if we had those kinds of resources, we have more ability in order to hold on to those incredible officers that we need within our community. This is detailed within our report and from the on-the-ground folks, which includes myself and my organization. Not too long ago, I had a rape victim who was 80 years old. My staff called me up. She was in a wheelchair. She had been raped, and her perpetrator was in my building. It took an hour and 15 minutes for law enforcement to arrive, but by that time, my team and I, didn't have the resources. She wanted to change her clothes. I went in to go search through our clothes that we have available to change her clothes out of the clothes she had been raped in, and all I could find was a pair of 5X sweatpants. And I remember with my staff taking the string and pulling it as tight as I could to help slide them over her legs just so she would have clean clothes. That is what direct services providers like myself are doing right now. We're taking 5X sweatpants and sliding them up an extra small person, trying to make things work with the little bit of resources that we have. She deserved better, and Indian country deserves better.
Has your report been submitted to the record?
No, we have not, but I can do that.
Can I do that?
Absolutely.
I'd like to request that be submitted to the record.
Without objection.
All right, thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. At this time, the chair recognizes the chairman of the Oversight Investigation Subcommittee, Dr. Gosar from Arizona. Dr. Gosar.
Dr. Middleman, under President Trump's Operation Spirit Return, your company, Othram, has harnessed AI and DNA sequencing to identify remains and provide families with closure about their missing loved ones. My question is, while processing DNA samples found at crime scenes or from remains, how does Othram protect the privacy of victims and the DNA data?
Thank you for the question, and we have been honored to participate in Operation Spirit Return and receive the support of the administration to work these cases, because it truly does lead to the resolution of the case. As it pertains to DNA data, we work only for law enforcement or for investigative organizations within the government, and every case that we handle is handled very carefully according to standards set forth through forensic accreditation. And the case then belongs to the agency that brings it to us. So we will be retained in the short term to assist an investigation, to produce an investigative lead, and that is returned as property back to the investigating agency, and we move on to the next case.
Okay, well, now, in addition to identifying the victim, what other factors can your technology distinguish from a DNA sample?
We can assist in a couple different areas. One issue I brought up earlier is, for example, NamUs has had prioritized funding to help Native American cases, so cases involving unidentified Native Americans. But even knowing that someone is Native American by whatever metric that they've set is an uncertainty. So the DNA testing we can do, for example, can properly categorize whether people are from a background that is consistent with the case we're trying to investigate. And as much as that sounds like a very obvious thing, it's been a real challenge. There are a lot of people miscategorized in NamUs across a number of ancestral origins. So that's one piece of data that we can collect to assist with. The second thing that we do is we can find nearest relatives. So we can find distant relatives to unidentified people, whether they're unidentified remains or they're suspects to a crime. And so we have that information to find the next of kin that we can then use to then figure out who someone is or who the perpetrator in a crime is. And we've also used it to exonerate people. Those are the two pieces of general information we retain, which is the genetic relationships and the ancestral background of the person.
Now, last year there was a horrific event that was portrayed in the newspapers where there's at least 1,000 children's shoes and women's shoes that were found, and they were in a mass grave. Were you ever invited by the state of the country of Mexico to actually help them with those indigenous people there?
We've not been contacted, but that's exactly the kind of work that we would really enjoy helping out at, because these kind of problems where you have mass graves, large casualty events, there's literally no context. Everything's been thrown into one pile. We've solved similar problems. We help the Marines, and we've helped AFDIL develop technology to identify unidentified servicemen. These same tools can be used to help address these issues where people have only, perhaps the shoes of children or some other small piece of evidence where it doesn't matter how many investigators you hire or put onto the case. There are no leads. And so your only recourse is to use the DNA to figure out whose shoes those were or who had handled those items and might be involved in the crime.
Now, Ms. Echo Hawk, the Urban Indian Health Institute has met with my office about the 2023 Phoenix Tribal Rehab scandal. Were all the victims recovered from these facilities, or are there still some missing victims?
I cannot speak to that. I am unsure of that fact specifically. but we do know that when folks are recovered, it is essential for them to have the services that they need, which includes our traditional Indian medicine. And I know when I say that, people are like, what does that actually mean? Well, that is defined by the tribes themselves. And when we give folks those kinds of resources, folks who have been missing and then are recovered, then have the opportunity to move forward with healing. Otherwise, you are going to sit here and to continue to address the crisis of opiates, the crisis of suicidality, and all of the things associated with that if we don't have the appropriate practices to ensure that these victims get the resources that they need. And I hope in this instance that all of those folks are recovered and they do get those resources.
Would you be an advocate? You're tenacious in what you undertake. And it seems to me like we'd love to have that answer. If you could be able to find that out, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to leave each one of you a question, and it's more of a statement. I learn a lot more from you than I do from myself, and many times my staff. Can you outline in a future question, it's coming to you, you can write it down, you don't have to give me the answer now, a protocol on how you would see and envision this solving this problem? Would that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Not Invisible Act report, there are a lot of solutions within that. And while I do acknowledge it has been removed from the website, it has been actionalized, not all of it, but we do know across the administration there have been points in that report that have been actionalized, but there is a path forward, like Dr. Boltail said, that is directed by the families. And in Washington State, we also have a group of families who direct all of our work, and that needs to be done. There's also protocols in regards to the data work that I do within my organization that we have published, and again, I have trained law enforcement across the nation, including one large database system that is used by more than 25% of all prosecutors, now has the simple boxes for American Indians and Alaska Natives. The protocols are there. Indian Country has created them. We just need to see them put into action.
See, I'm going to take a little liberty here in a second, because we had an educational collaboration with the tribes, and we never knew, I didn't know, that there were certain grants or certain monies available that they didn't want, you guys didn't want, because they didn't work for them. And they identified the right ones, and it made it a streamlined process. So giving you more options. So I think you could do that as well. We'd appreciate it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Gosar. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Ms. Randall, for 5 minutes. Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirits, all people, and say that you have champions here in Washington, D.C., and we are honored to walk alongside you in this journey to justice. And according to my Washington State Patrol, there are currently over 100 active cases for missing and murdered Indigenous people in our state alone. And during my time serving in the state legislature, we did make a lot of progress. We created the Washington State Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People Task Force with the support and expertise of so many families of the missing and Native-led organizations, including the Seattle Urban Indian Health Board. The task force co-authored state legislation that created the country's first missing Indigenous person alert, referred to as the Red Alert. The Red Alert works similarly to the Amber Alert and has seen incredible success so far. 80% of the people in the system are found. The task force also created the MMIWP Missing Persons Toolkit, launched in May 2025, answering the call from community for tools that are trauma-informed, culturally grounded, and responsive to the lived realities of Indigenous communities across the state. In addition to efforts by states and tribes at the local level, though, we need more federal action. And instead, as we have heard today, this administration, the Trump administration, has cut programs, delayed grant dollars, eliminated grants, and caused the loss of program officers through DOJ and other efforts. Federal agencies serving public safety and victims services in tribal nations have to provide the full funding for the programs needed in order to uphold trust and treaty obligations. It is our responsibility as a federal government. In case anyone is confused on either side of the aisle, this isn't DEI. These programs are the fulfillment of treaty and trust obligations for public safety on tribal lands and are owed to Native people. And I'm grateful that it feels like in this committee we have real bipartisan understanding and support. The federal government's trust responsibility is to help protect the safety and well-being of Native communities. And this responsibility was prepaid by tribes through treaties signed with the federal government. Ms. Echohawk, thank you so much for making the trip to the other side of the country and for your testimony. You mentioned the importance in the continuum of care for individuals once they've come home. And, you know, your story of firsthand account and service, I think, reminds all of us that those wraparound services are essential to making someone healthier and whole once they come home. But the reimbursement for traditional Indian medicine through CMS is limited, which is disappointing, especially for survivors of violence, because incorporating traditional medicine services, as we know, improves outcomes. Can you explain to the committee more about the benefits of traditional Indian medicine and why it deserves proper reimbursement through CMS?
Yes, and I appreciate you acknowledging the work of the task force in Washington State, which I'm blessed to co-chair alongside 3 other incredible tribal leaders. When we talk about traditional Indian medicine, what that looks like is it looks like using our traditional ways, whether the story of the blueberry I told you, what does that mean? What teachings are associated with that? That's counseling. That's looking at Western medicine. That's use of equine therapy, all things that are recognized within Western science. They could have asked an Indian. We would have told you all it worked a long time ago. But we know that it works. And at the Seattle Indian Health Board, we don't leave things to chance. We just don't say it works. We have the data to prove it. So we have incorporated traditional Indian medicine into our electronic medical records. And I can tell you, for our relatives who access traditional Indian medicine who are experiencing suicidality, and I say that as a young person who attempted suicide for the very first time at the age of 9 as a result of having no resources and the ongoing rapes that I was experiencing. And I know that many of our relatives experience that, and we work with them every day. For those who are experiencing suicidality and access our services, traditional Indian medicine, we have seen a 71% decrease in suicidality. As a suicide researcher who's worked across the nation for many years, I've never seen that in my experience. It only happens with the incorporation of traditional Indian medicine, and we have established a credentialing process. We know how to gather the data, and we know now that CMS is willing to reimburse it, and we also know that Secretary Kennedy, during a hearing, did say that he would be willing to look at an administrative fix, even though we do have, and I urge you to also look at the Urban Indian Parity Act as an opportunity to ensure that we can get the reimbursements we need in order to ensure that folks get access to traditional Indian medicine. This is the lives of our people. It literally brings life.
Thank you so much, Ms. Echohawk. Thanks for being here. And I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. At this time, I want to thank each of our witnesses for their valuable testimony and also for my colleagues on this dais for their questions. Members of the subcommittees may have some additional questions for the witnesses of both panels, and we will ask the witnesses to respond to those in writing. Under House Natural Resources Committee Rule 3, members must submit those questions to the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs clerk or the Oversight and Investigations clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, July 17th, 2026. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.